Hello, and welcome to Sunchaser. My name is Avinal, and Sunchaser is my project where I try to chase that which makes us wiser, healthier, and wealthier.
This time we're talking about the story of my life. I'm just kidding. We're talking about The Pathless Path by Paul Millard. Paul Millard today is an independent writer, freelancer, coach, and digital creator. But in his past life, Millard was a consultant, and he left the world of consulting to pursue something he calls the Pathless Path. In many ways, this book does read like my own story, the story of how I landed at a business school and then unconsciously adopted a definition of success, the default path, as Millard calls it. I was willing to do any work as long as it came with pay and prestige. I thought that the one time success of landing a top business school now meant that not only was I supposed to, but destined to continue that linear trajectory upwards, rising faster than everyone else in my company, onwards and upwards until the time it came to retire, at which time I would retire as a CEO or at least a CMO. Any detour from this path was not only unthinkable, but deplorable. How could I fail? It took me well over a decade to understand that I would be much happier on a different path as long as it meant that I could do meaningful work, like with Sunchaser. I resonated with the book, and I think you will too if you are someone who finds yourself getting distanced from your craft or even questioning your career choices. I think you'll enjoy the book. I think you'll enjoy the concepts and find value in the concepts that Millard has to talk about. And I think you'll also enjoy this podcast episode. Let's move into the core ideas from the book, The Pathless Path by Paul Millard. Millard starts the book by talking about his own life and how he joined a college where his peers embodied something he calls a success ethic. A hunger and drive to succeed in life by obsessively focusing on markers of achievement like grades or extracurricular activities, gold medals, scholarships, and so on. Soon, he too found himself steeped in this culture of hoop jumpers. It reminds me of my time at business school. A hoop jumper is a term used for students who are overly concerned about acquiring external indicators of competence more than they are concerned about following their own curiosity or actually learning something. They learn to do tricks, if you will, that signal to recruiters their fit with the company and to society at large their worth. And the recruiters and society, for their part, short of time and energy to vet everything deeply, do tend to rely on these indicators as proxies for real competence. Millard calls this reliance on proxies bad games as they incentivize the wrong things. Hoop jumpers are one category among many of people who have decided to follow the default path, a path or a life trajectory in which one aims to land a prestigious job and keep on steadily rising in the ranks until the time of retirement. It provides a low risk, respectable way for individuals to find their place in society. It does not need much thinking, as one's parents, and in some cases, even their parents, have been doing the same thing for several decades. That is why Millard has called it the default. Because one takes the default path for the clarity it provides by defining one's place and therefore worth in society, it is critical for someone on the default path to have work that is first and foremost seen as prestigious, irrespective of the actual kind of work. Millard himself says, quote, I wasn't picky about the type of work I'd be doing, I just wanted it to be seen as impressive. End quote. And personally, as someone who was on the default path for more than a decade, I can tell you that this is true. The prestige and admiration from society is a very important requirement for those who are on the default path. Why else would they have started on it in the first place? Millard spends time talking about the history of our relationship with work and how it has transformed from a means to an end in itself. For most of human history, we did not see work as something that was central to our identities or our place in society. Work was necessary, it was important, but only till the point that it made our lives comfortable, after which we stopped working. It is only very recently, I'll say in the last 100 years, that we have started competing on who can work the most. You can pick up various traditions. You could pick up the ancient Chinese tradition, or ancient Greek philosophy, or Indian philosophy, or you could even pick up what modern thinkers like Henry David Thoreau have written. And everywhere you'll find that work is seen as a means to something more important in life. But only lately, like I said, we have started competing on who can work the most and started seeing work as a badge of honor. Millard quotes work from sociologist Eric Fromm, who says that around the 16th century in Northern Europe, particularly in the wake of the Protestant Reformation, work started transforming from a mere necessity into a virtue, an end in itself. This is what sociologists later termed as the Protestant work ethic, where diligence, discipline, and productivity became imbued with moral significance. This evolving ethic then collided with the Industrial Revolution, which fundamentally reshaped how we worked, how society was structured. As societies transformed from agrarian to industrial societies, from artisanal to industrial societies, labor became centralized in factories and later in offices. Standardization of working hours happened, 9 to 5 happened, shift working happened, work got separated from life. And it was during this time that people started viewing work as something independent and different from what they do outside of work. Work became defined as a job, often a cog in a much larger machine. And this separation from life, this regimentation, further detached it from the more integrated and often seasonal rhythms of pre industrial life. Basically, we lost our connect with work. Then came the Second World War. And in the post World War II period, certain economies experienced rapid growth. One of those economies was the United States of America, which experienced rapid economic growth and sustained prosperity for its citizens from the 1940s to the 1970s. Because this country grew so rapidly, its models of work, its models of structuring society, and other things as well started being viewed favorably by the rest of the world and the countries who wanted similar growth. Oftentimes, we in the East, myself being an Indian, we bemoan how our culture is getting lost and our younger generation is becoming increasingly westernized. I think this fascination with and the adoption of the culture of the West, dare I say of the US, somewhere has its roots in the fact that the US economy grew so rapidly and led to so much prosperity for its citizens that for the people of other countries, it was like the cool kid at school that you wanted to be like. Anyway, this golden age in the US and some other parts of the world made stable, lifelong careers with predictable advancement seem not just possible, but the norm. The default path, which was get a good education, join a reputable company, work hard, climb the ladder, retire comfortably, appeared to be, and indeed it was for some time, a reliable formula for success. And because it was a reliable formula for success, it entrenched itself as a cultural ideal, not only in the US, not only in the West, but in many parts of the world. Because this period of upward mobility felt so consistent for those who were experiencing it, it created a powerful societal expectation that this is how things should be, making deviations feel like personal failings rather than a response to a changing world. The default path, as this is called by Millard, carries the legacy of this era of stable, rapid growth. It is this expectation of a linear, stable career within an established structure that is actually being challenged by the Pathless Path movement. Basically, Mirrored wants to tell you that there are more options for a good life than you might think. Anyway, because the default path entrenched itself so deeply in our society, many kids today start their education or careers with an unquestioned acceptance of this default path. Well meaning parents too think that this is the right approach because it did work for them. These life scripts, which you can think of as the culturally expected and accepted norms of what you're supposed to do with your life and what makes for a good life, they need to be very carefully chosen. And yet, as a society, we have so narrowly and so casually defined something that is so critical. That is why, for instance, being a stay at home mother may not be seen as valuable or given the importance that it deserves simply because it is not placed in the traditional hierarchy of what we see as work. Moving on, the promise of the default path was not lasting fulfillment anyway. It was instead stability. However, unlike the past, where the default path could actually work, today the default path is not as lucrative because, number one, growth rates across the developed world have plateaued. And number two, rapid changes in technology are causing entire career paths to become obsolete. And now, with AI on the horizon, who knows what might happen? Yet, many of us still unconsciously adopt that life script only to realize too late that that was not what we wanted, like I did. Further complicating the scene is that many people today do not connect to their work at a deeper level and are unable to articulate to themselves the value of their work. This has led to the rise of quote unquote bullshit jobs, a job that the person doing it himself agrees adds no value to society. Finding the promise of the default path lacking, one starts looking at other ways of feeling worthy. The result? Far too many people value themselves and others by a job title. I did too. This lack of intrinsic motivation and meaning at work also forces many people to pay a misery tax. That is, money spent by an unhappy worker to feel happy about their work or at least be able to continue functioning every day. This usually takes the form of sugary food, caffeine, alcohol, or quote unquote retail therapy. And as we get invested deeper and deeper into our identity as a worker, we start fearing the loss of that identity via job loss. Too many good people today hold down draining jobs for this exact reason. It gives them familiar discomfort. It is painful. You have to pay a misery tax for it, but at least it is familiar. Leaving that job and opening to the unfamiliar is akin to dying. And in many ways, it will be because that part of the ego which is attached to the worker identity will have to die. And so, using proxies for self worth and titles in exchange of meaning, we wait for the next promotion, for the next raise, for the next bonus. This is the arrival fallacy, the mistaken belief that true happiness and fulfillment will be found once a specific goal or milestone is achieved, rather than understanding that true happiness can be found only in the process of pursuing what is of meaning to you. Coming back to the book, Millard was happily cruising along on this path before two events in his life led him to question whether he may have rushed into accepting the life of the default path. The first was his grandfather's passing, and the second was his chronic health issues. These two events led to quote unquote existential openings in his life. These are times when we are forced to confront the real questions of importance. Millard gradually decided that the default path was not for him, and he chronicles this transformation from a hoop jumper to someone who is disenchanted with the default path, and then to someone who is invested and a believer of the pathless path in the book. Do read the book if you're interested. Now, when you're on the default path, you're likely following a life script written by someone else, rinsing and repeating it every day. Because this life is inherently not yours, it is possible that you may start questioning it, especially during events of turmoil. The courage to question the default path builds up slowly. I can personally attest to that. Those parts of you that were attached to the default path need to slowly die off, and a new you needs to emerge. A new you more open to experimentation. It often starts with a feeling about your current life that goes something like, is this it? Millard says that once you start asking questions like that, there is no going back. He uses the analogy of having a small pebble in your shoe. It's not enough to make you want to take off the shoe, but it's an annoyance nonetheless. The annoyance decreases when there are peaks, such as a promotion or a raise, or it increases when there are troughs, such as being passed over for a promotion. But the pebble is still there constantly. You start desiring to build a life of your own choosing, even though it may not be very impressive to society. You don't want to remain a quote unquote passive participant anymore. What are your values? You start to think about them. What life do you want to build? You start to think about that. What is it that you feel is intrinsically good? And how are you upholding that good? You start to think about that. Most people do not think this way. Indeed, most will not even be able to comprehend what you're talking about. Be practical, they will say. Millard agrees. Quote, you may feel the urge to tell everyone about your new insights, questions, and curiosities, but this can be a mistake. Your ideas may make others uncomfortable, and any doubt, skepticism, or criticism they express could convince you to run away. End quote. I have read in many places the same idea repeated, which is only intrinsic motivation lasts. Only good work will sustain and sustain you. You can talk a good game and get by, but eventually something will have to give. Either a life that feels empty or lacking, or you find the courage to actually do good work. I personally, as you may know, define good work as work that one would be willing to do for free, because the opportunity to do the work itself is the reward, like raising a child or painting or making music or writing. Isn't it an irony that if it's work that we would even do for free, it often makes for the quality that the world would pay for? Anyway, any other kind of motivation fades away. Like Millard says about his own desire to continue in the prestige economy, quote, I do not know how to want it anymore, end quote. At this point, if you continue on the default path, you may find your cynicism increasing and you may realize your complicity in creating conditions that you say you don't want. So, a life of tremendous cognitive dissonance. On the one hand, you do not like how you're conducting your life. You are disenchanted with your work. You are done playing the game. But on the other hand, you continue to play it. And more than that, you continue to pretend liking the game and liking the play. This leads to a life where you are conflicted in yourself. And Millard is giving you permission and even showing you the way of embracing a different path than what you might have thought for yourself initially. That is what he calls the pathless path. The pathless path, then, is a way of life proposed by Millard where you break away with intent from the life scripts that you may have unconsciously adopted and instead make one for yourself. Not only is this increasingly possible today with the internet and modern technologies, this sort of self authoring will also be increasingly needed in the coming times. Peppered throughout the book, therefore, is advice by Millard on how one can embrace and embark on the pathless path, starting with the importance of experimentation. This is the central approach to the pathless path. Do not assume that any approach, even if it differs from the default path, is ideal. Think of your life as a series of experiments where you try to figure out what works for you personally. Many will wait for retirement to finally start living. Miller tells you don't need to wait for retirement. Instead, he borrows Tim Ferriss's concept of a mini retirement where one breaks up the 20 to 30 years that have after retirement into smaller chunks and takes them every few years. This time will give you enough space to experiment with what works and what you want to work on before returning to the default path if required. Others have also spoken about the need of experimentation to find one's life's purpose. I am reminded of Stephen Kotler's guide to finding your massively transformative purpose that he covered in his book, The Art of Impossible. Read it now on sunchaser.life. Even if you're not in a position to leave your job, Millard recommends attempting to squeeze in a month of free time during your annual vacation. As you experiment, either in your mini retirement, which is usually for 6 months or more, or even during your month of free time, you will start figuring out what you consider good work. And when you find it, you can backcast from there to figure out what needs to change in your life today to make that future a reality. Quote, experiment with your work and your life until you stumble into a virtuous cycle that helps you continue to move in a positive direction. End quote. For instance, after a period of thinking and experimenting, I have realized personally that Sunchaser is what I consider to be good work. It is something that I would want to do for a very long time, if not the rest of my life, and hence my actions today are focused on making sure that I am able to make it a bigger part of my future. Remember also that oftentimes the more important part is knowing what not to do, what Millard calls inverting. So, instead of asking what makes a good life, think about what makes for a bad one and then avoid doing those things. Quote, finding something worth doing indefinitely is more powerful and exciting than any type of security, comfort, stability, or respect a job might offer. End quote. Again, powerful words by Millard that I personally relate to. Moving on. The next step on how to embark on the pathless path is to stay curious. Millard talks about maintaining a sense of wonder, curiosity, and humility through it all. Any new project, whatever you do, involves a learning curve, and so it will be the case in your embrace of the pathless path as well. You will stumble and get confused. Don't lose heart. Embrace the spirit of the fool, as the writer George Leonard has called it. Be humble, be willing to learn, and know that mistakes are part of the journey. The Pathless Path is an aspirational journey in the sense that one first discovers the value that they want to embody and then works towards them. This is contrasted with an ambitious journey, or really the journey of the default path, where one thinks that they already know what they value. So you can see the diametric opposition between the default path and the pathless path. On the default path, you already know what you value, whereas on the pathless path, you are open minded to your values. You discover through the process of experimentation what is it that you value in the first place, and then work backward from there to craft a life that embodies those values. But the thing about an aspirational journey is that you have to learn to silence every so often your ought to self. Your ought to self is that part of you that tells you that you ought to continue working, that you ought to live in the same city, that you ought to remain in the comfortable cocoon of a 9 to 5, or more like 9 to 8 these days. Again, there's nothing wrong with the default path, but the trade off is that you are risking, as Seneca has said, toiling at the preoccupations that are not even yours. And therefore, in the aspirational journey, you have to learn how to silence your ought to self. By silencing your ought to self for a while, you allow your ideal self to emerge. Quote, learning to have a healthy distrust of this impulse and knowing that even if things go wrong, we might discover things worth finding can help us open ourselves up to the potential for wonderful things to happen. End quote. The next step on embarking on the pathless path is to redefine success. The author tells us that we need to redefine today what a successful life means to us. And indeed, it has already been redefined for us in so many ways. Like, I think when I was a child growing up, there was nothing called a career as an influencer or a content creator. Yet, today, many people are doing meaningful work as well as making a lot of money on these exact things. Therefore, the definition of success is already being redefined. Millard is just asking us to be more open to the fact that the world is changing. He is asking us to reconsider what we may have accidentally accepted as the definition of success as we embarked on the default path. Being on the pathless path does not mean rejecting conventional markers of success, but it does mean being deliberate about what you consider as success and why. The courage to say no is fundamental to redefining success. It means recognizing that success isn't about accumulating every socially approved achievement or saying yes to every opportunity that the default path presents. Instead, true success begins with the discernment and integrity to decline paths roles, or expectations that don't align with your authentic inner self. Another change is a shift of mindset where you start defining success not by what you are lacking that you then need to acquire, but rather by what you have that you then are allowed to share. This is what Millard calls the second chapter of success. Basically, the moment you are able to share with the world your gifts, whether that's the gift of writing, or engineering, or coding, or taxation, or defining laws, or poetry, whatever your gifts are, if you find an outlet to share with the world those gifts, that is success. At least that is how Millard is asking us to redefine it. Not as something that you lack, which then you have to acquire, like a car or houses, but instead as something that you already have as an innate ability that you then are allowed to share with the world. It is a profound shift in what we consider as success. And indeed, if all of us started thinking this way, we would realize that we have far greater control on choosing our own success than we originally thought. Redefine success as the courage to honor the creator within you. Redefine it as the act of giving expression to your unique talents, passions, to your innate ability to make or build or contribute to something authentic. It's about valuing and manifesting what genuinely wants to be brought forth through us, regardless of whether it fits a conventional title or a career trajectory. Success becomes the fulfillment found in this process of creation and in making a contribution that feels true to who we are. Indeed, this reframing of success is a powerful enabler on the pathless path. And on a personal note, that is exactly what I'm doing here with Sunchaser. The next step is to redefine creativity. Millard suggests that it's not just the domain of traditional artists. On the pathless path, creativity can mean crafting a unique business model, designing a portfolio career, solving problems in an unconventional way, or even the art of structuring one's life around different values. Creativity is for everybody, and it becomes a vital tool for navigating the ambiguity and inventing new possibilities in our life. And that leads directly to his profound statement, quote, "Creative output is the fuel for the pathless path," end quote. Indeed, being able to create something, being able to put your mark on something that you have created, to be able to point to it and say, look at that, that is my creation, is one of the biggest rewards and, yes, the fuel for the pathless path. Another key distinction that Millard draws between the default path logic and the pathless path logic is that on the default path logic, you have to get the job before you can do the work. But on the pathless path approach, you simply do the work first and then decide if it's something that you want to continue. This is a game changer. On the default path, we often wait for permission, for a job title, for someone else to validate our skills and tell us that we are finally given permission to do what we want to do. On the pathless path, the initiative is internal. It's about starting out, it's about experimenting, it's about producing based on your intrinsic motivation, curiosity, or perceived need. You're not waiting for anyone to give you permission, you're not waiting for the role. You're creating value up front. You're learning as you go and taking iterative steps to improvement. This doing the work first approach builds real world experience, generates feedback, and often clarifies whether the path is indeed one for you to continue on. This is such a vital concept. It means that the things we make, the projects we initiate, the ideas we share, they aren't just the outcomes. They are the very energy source that propel us forward and guide our direction. Each piece of creative output can build momentum, can generate learning, can create opportunities, it can even boost confidence and clarity. In essence, on the pathless path, we don't wait for the path to appear. We actively generate it through walking it. This proactive, generative approach is a world away from passively waiting for the next step on a predefined ladder. The next step that can help you on your journey on the pathless path is finding your tribe. Millard recommends, quote unquote, finding the others. It means finding two kinds of people on your pathless path. The first kind are the people you can learn from. That is, people who have been on the pathless path longer than you. This includes veterans like Tim Ferriss, but the internet can show you many others charting their own paths. And the second group of people is those you want to create for. That is, the people who form your market. These are the people who will be interested in and appreciate your craft as well as cheer you on your journey. Mass market standardization is an artifact of the Industrial Revolution and devoid of life. You need to find your niche. Quote, once you figure out who you intend to serve, you can go all in and focus on what it takes to become great. Thinking we have to serve a mass audience is default path thinking. End quote. The next thing that's going to help you on your journey on the pathless path is playing long games. Basically, being patient. Millard acknowledges the importance of being patient because he knows that we may be used to certain creature comforts when we were on the default path. And now those comforts may have to be reduced because the pathless path, initially at least, does come with the cessation of stable income. This may lead one to give up on the pathless path prematurely, and Millard cautions against that. He tells you that you need to be patient when you have decided to embark on the pathless path. Anti fragility is another concept he mentions. That is, by taking steps to limit one's susceptibility to known risks and problems along the path, one can ensure they are able to stay long enough for the path to start making sense. For instance, having multiple sources of income can reduce the anxiety of your salary income going away. Millard is also telling you to not ignore expected problems. Being on the pathless path comes with its own set of problems too, such as lack of stable income or what to do with one's time being the two primary ones. Millard tells us to grapple with our hidden money scripts and be clear what money means to us, whether we have reached the maturity to consider it as a means or are we still seeing it as an end. Be realistic about whether you have enough in savings to sustain yourself or others dependent on you through the time that you plan to stay on the pathless path. Another critical concept to define is what is enough. Having this clarity is critical to ensuring we do not veer off the path, since economic opportunities may still present themselves even if we are not on the traditional default path. Quote, if we don't define enough, we default to more, which makes it impossible to understand when to say no. End quote. Millard also talks about gravity problems. These are problems that, like gravity, you can't do much about. The only way is to sit with them and try to use them to your advantage because they're not going away. Finally, embrace modern technologies. Several times in the book, Millard repeats this. Following the pathless path was not possible until very recently. But now, with the internet, remote work, and the dematerialization and democratization driven by modern technology, it totally is possible today. A guy with a laptop and an internet connection today can learn virtually any skill, create and distribute his unique content to the world, build a community around his passions, and design a livelihood that truly aligns with his deepest interests and desired lifestyle, largely independent of traditional gatekeepers or geographical boundaries. And with AI taking off, as I say this, the possibilities for creating a one man company aligned around your interests is only going to increase. So do not ignore modern technologies, embrace them. Finally, let's talk about what to expect on the pathless path and how it feels. Starting with the awareness of how you were suffering. This often dawns with surprising clarity once you've stepped away from the default path. It might not have been acute, dramatic suffering, but perhaps a low grade discontent, a chronic low grade discontent, a persistent feeling of misalignment, a quiet stress of playing games that didn't feel authentic in the workplace, or a subtle but constant effort to suppress your true inclinations. Like realizing how heavy a backpack was only after you have taken it off, this awareness of how much you were suffering in the default path only comes once you have started embarking on the pathless path. The new awareness isn't about regret, but about a deeper understanding that fuels the commitment to a more aligned way of living. You basically start feeling more alive, if you will. The next thing to expect is so much time and so much control. This is the most immediate and profound shift, I can tell you myself. The default path often dictates our schedules, priorities, and how large chunks of our lives are structured. Suddenly, you might find yourself with vast expanses of unscheduled time and a level of autonomy over your days that can be both exhilarating and at the same time quite terrifying at first. It's like being handed a canvas and all the paints. The initial freedom can feel overwhelming, and learning to thoughtfully structure this time is a new and essential skill that everyone must learn when they embark on the pathless path. But within this space, obviously, lies the incredible opportunity to design a life truly around your own rhythms and values. Another thing to expect is the reemergence of curiosity. You start to ask deeper questions such as, what is my identity now? What am I living for? What am I working for now? What is worth doing? When the default path and its associated job titles no longer define us, the big questions naturally start to surface. Who am I without external validation? If not for the next promotion or a bigger paycheck, what is the true purpose of my efforts? What work feels intrinsically valuable and worth dedicating my energy to? These are examples of questions that you will start asking. These aren't easy questions to answer, and the answers themselves evolve over time. But the very fact that you're asking them signifies a shift towards a more conscious, examined, and self authored life. One of the core pursuits that I have here at Sunchaser. Another thing to expect is that you don't need to play bad games anymore. There's often a profound sense of relief that comes with it. So much energy is spent on the default path, navigating office politics, managing impressions, managing horizontally, managing vertically, making sure that the boss is happy, striving for metrics that don't really reflect true value but are really bad tests and system hacks, like I've discussed. Stepping onto a pathless path means that you largely get to define your own game, your own rules of engagement, and your own measures of success. This allows for a more authentic and integrated way of working, where your energy can be channeled into the work itself rather than into simply navigating a system. Courage starts showing up again. You realize that you don't need that much to live a good life. Leaving the perceived security of a conventional path takes an initial leap of courage, but interestingly, once you're on the pathless path, a different kind of courage often begins to flourish. The courage to simplify, to define enough, to prioritize the non material forms of wealth like time, autonomy, and meaning. The consumerist pressures and lifestyle inflation, often tied to the default path, start to lose their grip. Many discover that a deeply fulfilling and good life might require much less financially than what they once believed, especially when their work aligns with their values and they're no longer paying the misery tax to cope with an unfulfilling role. You will start to also experience openness to creativity and experimentation. Without the rigid job descriptions and prescribed methods of the default path, there is an invitation to become more creative and experimental in all aspects of life and work. How you structure your day, the kinds of projects you take on, how you solve problems, even how you define your offerings all become open to fresh approaches. Experimentation becomes a primary mode of learning and navigating. You try something, you observe the results, you learn, you fail, or you win, and you iterate. This is where Millard's idea of creative output as fuel truly comes alive, as each experiment informs the next step on a path that you are actively creating. A path that isn't laid out for you, but the one that you are actively creating by the act of walking on it. Something else that I can share about the Pathless Path is the pride of creation. This is a personal experience to me. The pride of having created something meaningful is so new to my life, at least now on the Pathless Path. I have created work in the past that I have been proud of on the default path, but those creations were more intellectually stimulating than they were meaningful to me. And in any case, they got wiped when I handed over my laptop on my last day. Being a solo creator on the Pathless Path allows me to create work that I can point to and say, look, I made that. I hope it's of value to you. This isn't just pride in an accomplishment, it's what I see as pride in authorship, pride in creation. It is a beautiful reward on the Pathless Path. As Millard says, it is fuel, Something negative that also you can expect on the pathless path is a lot of worrying about the future. Money anxiety, feeling lost. These are very real and often significant challenges for those on the pathless path, myself included. The predictability of a regular paycheck and employer provided benefits is replaced by a landscape that is much more uncertain. There is no doubt about it. Financial anxiety is a constant companion. Navigating this new reality requires developing new skills, hard skills in terms of financial literacy, budgeting, so on and so forth, and also soft skills in terms of a certain stoicism in the face of life's challenges. And also creativity as you try to build additional sources of income as the salary income essentially goes down to zero. Mindset is also required during this time. You need to build a resilient mindset to weather the inevitable ups and downs. This money anxiety is a real and practical hurdle that people on the pathless path, at least initially, if nothing else, have to deal with every single day. The pathless path can also lead you off a cliff if you don't know why you started on it. Do not quit your job out of anger or revenge. Eric Fromm, the sociologist, has argued, quote, those freed from oppression but unable to develop a positive version of freedom were destined to be filled with feelings of separatedness and anxiety, end quote. Millard also echoes this critical warning. Quote, figuring out what to do with freedom once we have it is one of the biggest challenges on the pathless path. End quote. Simply escaping a negative situation like a toxic job or a toxic boss, burnout, is often a catalyst, but it cannot be the only reason that you're going on the pathless path. Else, you will find yourself lost very soon. I personally would recommend that you find work that you want to do for free, that is intrinsically, inherently meaningful, and start from there. As the sociologist Eric Fromm has suggested, freedom from something without a corresponding freedom to pursue something meaningful, can lead to drift, anxiety, and a sense of being unmoored. The positive version of freedom requires taking responsibility for creating your own structure, purpose, and meaning. The why behind your choice to step off the default path needs to be much more than a rejection of the old. It needs to involve an active, albeit evolving, embrace of new values or a new direction you want to explore. Figuring out what to do with the hard won freedom is indeed a central and ongoing challenge as well as an opportunity. Another thing that you can expect on the pathless path is that people will simply see you as a bad egg. You cannot avoid this. Choosing a pathless path often means diverging from deeply ingrained societal norms and expectations, and this can lead to misunderstanding, skepticism, and even disapproval from friends or family, former colleagues who are still invested in the default path. They might project their own fears or judgments, seeing your choice as impractical or risky or a sign of failure. Like I said, they may think of you as a bad egg. If you internalize this too deeply, if you become too defensive, you risk recreating the very feelings of pressure, judgment, and unhappiness that you wanted to leave behind. It takes inner resilience and a strong sense of your own why to navigate these reactions, as I said before. Holding on to your own truth while remaining compassionate about why others may not understand it, and as Millard has advised before, being discerning about whom you share your deepest insights with is key during this time. Avoiding cynicism about both the default path, because it does work for some, as well as the people on that path, is vital for maintaining a hopeful and constructive journey. In closing, Millard has written honestly and from a place of good faith vulnerability, so that you may not feel alone and develop the courage to possibly embark on your own pathless path. There are a lot of concepts in the book that one can immediately start practically using if they have decided to walk down the pathless path. Millard also provides a list of 10 things at the end of the book to further clarify this. Please purchase the book to learn more. A friend recommended that I read this book, and now I can see why he said that. I think I needed to read this book at this stage of my life now that I've decided to follow my own pathless path. It takes courage, to follow the pathless path. I'm reminded of the Emerson quote: God will not have his work made manifest by cowards. Having the courage to take the shot is where it all starts. No courage, no dice. Though courage is no guarantee for success, I cannot now imagine living a life where I don't at least give it a shot. I have to live true to myself. Millard himself talks about the various challenges he still faces on his own pathless path, but he still concludes that he would not have it any other way. Me too. And until next time, Sunchaser.